Dave Garrison, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to learn and to share.
I am looking forward to that as well, Dave. What you're talking about is one of those things that leaders might assume they know, but the reality in the workplace is different. I can't wait to talk about your book, The Buy-in Advantage, Why Employees Stop Caring, and how great leaders inspire everyone to give their all. Before we get to your insights, Dave, would love to get to know you a little bit better. Whereabouts did you grow up, and how has your upbringing helped contribute to who you've become?
Great question. Thank you for asking. It's a pretty short answer. I grew up on the East Coast out in Delaware where my dad worked for DuPont and my mom was a school teacher. So pretty average middle class family, very comfortable. But what I watched is my dad would come home from work and be glad to be gone from work, not because he didn't like what he did, but because he would say things like, I had a performance review today. And I'd say, great, what happened? He'd say, they said you need to shine your shoes more. And he said, I couldn't figure out what it had to do with my work. And it's like, have they lost their mind? And I realized I didn't know it at the time, but there was a real leadership crisis way back then. Also spent some time in California, and what I've observed about people and organizations and what I've experienced myself for several decades as a CEO and as a board member at companies like Ameritrade have certainly informed proven practices that work that are outlined in the buy-in advantage.
That proven element of it makes a difference, Dave. I'm wondering why there hasn't been as much progress in this area as we would have thought. There are lots of brilliant authors, CEOs, people like you who've written books. Many of them I've had on the podcast. We've had conversations. But when we look at the actual experience of employees, it hasn't shifted that much over the past years or even arguably past few decades. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's through no fault of leaders who are busting their butts every day to do what's right, to work hard, to get better results. But a couple of things have been missing. One is leaders learn how to lead from either books that they read or whatever, but more importantly, from leaders that they perceive as successful. And we have not had the patterns or the habits that include people in generating success. In other words, they haven't seen the practices at work. And so it is up to leaders to begin those practices. The next challenge is nobody has knocked on my door as a leader, as a CEO of an organization, to demand that we pay attention to incorporating people and generating buy-in. What we do is we get requests from the board and from analysts and from investors about where are you on sales? What are you doing about gross margin? What about supply chain? And those are very real issues. And interestingly enough, there is a straight line between people and profits that we totally tend to miss because nobody is asking about it and nobody has provided practical things we can do. The other thing that's occurred, although for decades, as you said, the data and the results haven't changed. It's pathetic that people don't show up as a whole human being at work. I like to refer to it as the difference between going to the job and being happy and pleasant. Oh yeah, it's a fine place to work. That's the engagement scores we look at. Buy-in, totally different. Buy-in is what Friday night, in the Friday night lights, if you're in America, at the local football stands. That's buy-in. People are bringing their hearts and their souls and their guts to what's going on. How come we leave that in the parking lot at work? It's not anything we have to do, but leaders do not yet have the tools and have not practiced the tools, except for very few that are featured in the book, have not practiced the tools on bringing Friday night lights to Monday morning meetings. Instead of thank God it's Friday or oh no, it's Monday, why isn't it? I can't wait. Where is that? How's it missing?
It is missing. Now, you also talk about a perfect storm that is
Mm.
happening that has impacted this. So I wonder two things before you talk about the elements of the perfect storm. Is it that at any point in time, we look at the way things are operating and we see them as being unprecedented at perfect storm? Or is there now really a perfect storm impacting the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's actually truly a perfect storm. And the reason I say that is in the last 100 years, it has been about 108 years since we've seen a pandemic that has caused people to re-examine their values and their lives. So I would argue the Spanish flu is probably the last time. You can say, it's not to discount the terrible flu crisis in or disease crisis across Asia more recently, but really worldwide. And this has caused people to say, what's important to me? What is the role of work in my life? And so we've gone through serious self-examination about what we want from work, and a couple of things have resulted. One is more than ever, a lot of people are challenging, what is the purpose of the work that I'm doing? Why does it matter? And frankly, as leaders, most leaders are not equipped to answer that question except to say, make money and I'll tell you what to do and get back to work. And that's not a purpose. Purpose really describes how the world is changing because we exist. What is the impact we're making in people's lives? And if every single employee knows that, you're on step one to buy-in. If they can see themselves in a compelling purpose, you're on the road to buy-in. So change number one is this global pandemic that caused people to wonder, is it worth it for me to spend an hour driving to work each way? Which brought us to point number two, where does the work get done? And I'm glad to share the story of somebody who works for a very well-known company whose first name could be sales. And the last name, you'll have to guess what it is, but he was a leading sales manager there. And he got the call that said, you have to come back to the office. And he said, why? There's nothing I do. I don't interact with anybody at the office. It makes no sense. It's because that's our policy. And research at Stanford and other places suggests that a hybrid work week generates better results and has a monetary value to the employees, to the teammates. And yet sometimes we hear companies say, oh no, you have to be at work. And when they go to work, they're wasting a lot of time in meetings that aren't well run without a clear sense of purpose and a clear sense of priorities, all which are required for buy-in. So number one is global pandemic. Number two is this whole point of what's the purpose? And then on top of that, we've had all this change of supply chain, and now it's tariffs and what's going on with tariffs, and the policy changes by the week. And so all this uncertainty causes uncertainty in the human being that shows up for work. And that's our opportunity as leaders, because to attract and retain talent in a way you've never thought about before.
What you are mentioning is that these are real emotional, psychological shifts that have taken place in people.
Fundamentally, if the objective of the business is to make money along with our compelling purpose, then we're leaving money on the table by not responding to what is versus what was. Perhaps you could share with the listeners the story about the volleyball coach that you posted on recently, and I'd like to give you another example. What was the story with your daughter?
I've been watching my daughter play volleyball over the past few years. This year, she plays on a club team. And it's incredible how the coach of the club team goes through the mechanics, coaches the girls, but doesn't bring out the best out of any individual for the team. And the team isn't performing well, but put performance to one side. And then my daughter is playing on the high school's co-ed volleyball team. Just watching the coaching and its impact, it's incredible how she brings out the best, both from my daughter and the entire group. Now, as I was reflecting on this, in sports, when I talk to people about sports, they recognize it. Oh, sure, NFL, NBA, NHL, coach of the year, the coach makes a huge difference. But sometimes they don't think about the impact of that in organizations. So that's part of what I was reflecting on, the powerful impact and difference that coaching can make.
I think that's such a great example. We talk about in the book, by an advantage, the difference between treating people as human doings versus human beings. And the coach that has been successful that you've observed is treating the players as human beings. And it reminded me, I had this conversation with Dusty Baker, just a renowned baseball coach. And I said, so forgive my ignorance, Dusty, what is your job as general manager of the San Francisco Giants? He said, it's not what you think it is. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, I've got these professionals that are on the road for months playing lots of games, and it is very demanding. We need them to be their best every single day, every single night. And he said, my job was to make sure that there are no distractions. I said, can you tell me more about that? He said, yes. They have kids, they have ailing parents, they have spouses. My job is to make sure that the issues they have off the field are dealt with by the organization. Give them total support so that they can focus. They're already pros. They know what to do. I can't tell them how to pitch or how to field. They know that. If they have questions, they can go to some of our specific technique coaches, but I am giving them support as a human being is basically what he said. And so here's something that happens in organizations. I'll see a CEO walk around and say, or a vice president of something or another walk around and say, how are you doing? And the answer is fine. And what I heard from a great CEO is, do you know what FINE stands for? I said, no, what does FINE stand for? And she said, feelings inside never expressed. And what I learned from that profound insight is that our opportunity when somebody says fine, just be silent. Because what we're trained to do is just go on and say, oh, okay, Mahan, I'm glad you're doing fine. Listen, I have a favor. Would you please work on blah, 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 blah. And so the alternative is to say something like, can you tell me what you're celebrating? Can you share with me a personal and professional celebration? Or what's really going on for you? And wait and listen and ask follow-up questions. That's recognizing the human being. Recognizing the human doing is, hey, listen, the receivables over 90, they're getting a little aged, and we really got to tighten up there to get the cash flow up. So I'd like to know what your action plans are. That's asking a human doing, and a human being will do a lot more than a human doing. And so this applies to recruiting and retention, as we talk about in the book as well. So for example, how are you using your company's values and your company's compelling purpose in the interview process? Because people are going to leave because it's, the lie we're all told, they'll leave because of money. Actually, that's rarely the case. They leave because of fit. Either they're not getting what they want from the company or their boss is a jerk, but they can't say that. It's what they politely say is, I got a better job. Uncover it. Let's go to values fit and let's go to purpose fit before they ever join the company. So in the interview process, let's take the opportunity and ask, share, hey, our compelling purpose is creating happiness. Can you tell me how you'd see yourself in that? Or can you tell me an example of when you created happiness? Look for alignment in values and purpose, because that will predict longevity, as opposed to, it says here, you've had 4 years in accounting. Can you tell me exactly what you did at ABC Corporation? Which is interesting, and I'd argue, frankly, irrelevant. So this whole idea of human beings versus human doings is a through line in the book, and what your daughter's coach is practicing.
It is a powerful point that you make, Dave. And as someone who believes that AI is not only transforming, but will be even more transformative to knowledge work and expertise, I believe some of the things that organizations are looking for, that experience and the ability to do things, can be very easily replaced by AI. But what you are talking about is the humanity and that human connection and intuition that cannot be. So as we are going through this transformation, what you're talking about becomes even more critical for organizational success.
Yes. And this new Gen Z, like other generations, I've heard some leaders say they're worthless. They don't really want to work, blah, 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 blah. Same thing is said about millennials. Same thing is said about Xers. Same thing is said about every generation. This generation in particular values experiences and making an impact as much as money. Making an impact requires them to be asked and included. They want to buy in. And if they're not asked to buy in, the money is interesting and irrelevant. They will move on to somewhere that has a better values match and where they can have an impact. So the question is, how do you get people's opinions on important issues without bringing the organization to a halt and without trying to create a consensus, which is the lowest common denominator? So in the book, we talk about a collective genius process. that allows you to quickly, without discussion, get best thinking on an issue and get people involved so their voices are heard. When somebody's voice is heard, they will go along with whatever we collectively decide, even when it's not their idea, because their voice was heard. It's just how we're wired as human beings. There's this myth that somehow we have to emasculate ourselves if we ask other people for information. And in fact, we can be very secure in what we know to be true for ourselves and recognize we don't know the truth. We know our truth, but your truth teaches me. And so that's my opportunity.
There is tremendous power in that collective intelligence. Now, what I wonder though, Dave, is what you are saying runs counter to some of the high profile successes. So there are lots of memes of tech entrepreneurs who have succeeded without approaching leadership the way you and I are talking about. So are they the rare exceptions? Or why is it that they're able to succeed and we are saying in general in organizations, it takes a different approach to succeed?
Yeah, I think that's a great and a fair question. My answer would be they are one in a million, but I would also say they're very good at one of the techniques we talk about in the buy-in advantage, which is use your experience to inform the outcome that you desire and your criteria for what great looks like, and then allow people to apply their experience and imagination. So a simple example is, you probably have the story, Steve Jobs, when they were developing the little iPod player, they brought the engineers, had all these features, and they had all these buttons and all these, there's a device that did everything. They were going to kill Walkman, which was an old device that Sony had. And Jobs said, no, you can have one button and an on-off switch. And I said, what do you mean one button? He said, no, you can have one button and an on-off switch. It's going to be simple and elegant. It's going to be an Apple product. And so he used his experience to inform the criteria of what great looks like. What leaders will unintentionally do is come into they're swimming in the morning or working out and they're thinking, oh, I got a great idea. And they'll walk in and say, hey, T, I got a great idea. And people are left to say nothing but, oh, that's a great idea, boss, or ask questions around the edges, which kills the conversation and the leader gets no input from it. What really effective leaders do is they will ask themselves, how do I know my idea is a great idea? And work backwards to the checklist in their head. They know what their outcome is, and they know what the checklist in their head is that allowed them to create that great idea. Effective leaders share desired outcomes plus the checklist in their head or their criteria, share that with a team, and then say, hey, why don't you give it some thought? And they'll hear new ideas that they had never considered possible. And so it's not that you as a leader don't have more experience, you do, but you only had your experience. But if you can take your experience to inform your criteria and desired outcome and then throw it open, you'll get a lot better results and people will be bought into whatever it is you do, and you offer your idea last. Leaders go last. Leaders go last, except when it comes to vulnerability and leaders go first.
What powerful points, Dave. I love the framework that you talked about with respect to clarity of that outcome and the checklist, and that the leader is not just defaulting to the team and to the group on everything. There is a role for the leader to play, but beyond that clarity of outcome and the checklist, there isn't the micromanagement in the process toward achieving that. Sometimes leaders confuse those two, either go to the extreme of lack of clarity on the outcome and the checklist, or they are micromanaging every single step because they want to make sure things get done right.
Yes. So if you look at classic micromanagers, Steve Jobs, again, incredibly successful, had spectacular failures in his career, but he micromanaged only on those criteria that were critically important to him. He didn't micromanage on finance. He didn't micromanage on supply chain. He micromanaged on what was critical to him. And so it doesn't mean you can't micromanage, but here's the deal. Be honest with yourself. What am I not able to do because I'm spending time micromanaging? And I would ask, is that the highest and best use of your time as a leader? Is that truly the priority to micromanage? Or do you want to lead by informing and reinforcing what it is that's most important for us to get done, what our values are, what our compelling purpose is, and what our criteria for what great looks like? That will have a lot bigger impact on scaling the organization. Whereas micromanaging, we've just lost you as a leader as you screw around with micromanaging.
Now, in doing this, Dave, sometimes I get audience members emailing and saying, makes sense if I was the CEO, if I was the division head, you name it. So I'm the top
Right,
person and this is how I want to approach it. But
right.
how about if I am a mid-level manager in the organization
Yeah.
where my boss has certain expectations? How can I approach leading my team within a structure or environment that I can't control as well as if I was higher up in the hierarchy?
Leadership occurs at all levels. Leadership is not a title, leadership is an attitude. Leaders are most powerful when they are seen as informal leaders. When people respect them, they know that the leader has their six, if you will, is watching out for them when they understand them as a human being. So here's what a leader can do. Let's say you have a micromanager boss. Not a fun place as a middle manager. Say you're a director or a supervisor or whatever level, and you've got a micromanager boss. Take the objective of your boss and share it with your team and say, the boss expects that this will be the outcome. I'm curious to know what questions we have about that and how can we make that a reality for our team. So instead of you telling what your team to do, ask your team how they would think about making that a reality and let everybody bring their own experience to the table to create buy-in and then come up with a collective genius idea on how we're going to execute this idea that we know is important to the boss. Everybody can lead at any level. You don't need a title to lead.
That's a great question that the audience can use. You also, in the book, go into how great leaders ask catalytic questions. What do you see as a catalytic question, and how can we ask more of those of our teams and organizations?
Yeah, I'm curious what struck you about that quote about catalytic questions.
Leaders a lot of times know, Dave, that they're supposed to ask questions. One of
Mhm.
those things that we have heard over and over again. But what, in my observation, I haven't seen is asking questions that really get people to think at a different level.
Yes.
There is real power and real thought needs to go into that asking of questions. So I love the thinking around catalytic questions in that they open up better thinking. It's not just asking a question to get people to contribute thoughts.
Yes. So we talk about a couple of different techniques in the book, the buy-in advantage. One is instant analysis, asking people on their own to consider their answers to the question, what's working, what's not working, and let them create a list without any discussion. Because if we just ask that question in a group meeting, we're going to follow the bouncing ball of conversation. And it's usually the person with the biggest title, the biggest ego, or the loudest mouth that controls the conversation. And we don't get to hear all voices. And if you ask a room, about half the people think about answers overnight and they can give you a great answer tomorrow, whereas half of us can just look at the data and springboard our analysis. So asking the group ahead of time to consider their answer to this question, what's working around here, what's not, and then compiling a list, you'd be amazed at how people view the organization. And this applies, for example, that we see a common mistake in mergers we see or takeovers we see. The leader comes in and says, hi, we're from ABC Corporation, delighted to be your new owners. We really love what you do around here. Now here's how we're going to do it differently. They never stop to ask the question, what is it that we do really well around here that we want to make sure we don't screw up? And what do you see as the opportunities? Because you have one chance to understand that the people doing the work actually see things that you could not possibly see. And if they're asked, they all have ideas on how to make it better. And what we do is we say trait things like, oh, man, we have an open door policy. If anything, if you have any ideas, be sure to come through the open door. And that never happens because it doesn't feel sincere and it's not something we're encouraging. So analysis is questioned like, what could we do that would be game changing? If we had no constraints on us, how could we just absolutely delight our customers, or what are new customer opportunities, or what could we do that's different? And ask people to tap into their imagination and give them time to answer and then compare ideas. You'd be amazed what will come up.
It's incredible, Dave, as you're talking about this, much of my role is coaching and consulting with CEOs and leadership teams. First of all, my two favorite questions are what's working and what's not working. When asked in a way that really encourages people to be open, in
Mm.
many instances, the leaders in the organization, the individuals in the organization have the best answers. So it's just taking the time to ask that in a way where we allow people the space to think and the safety to share those thoughts. And then I love the fact that you can also get people to think out of the box, out of the ordinary, because the people closest to doing their roles, their jobs, customers, a lot of times have great ideas. If they are asked the right questions, they can share those ideas, which both helps you understand better and get them to buy into the process better as well.
Yeah, we have a story in the book about that, which just is incredible. We describe this process of discovery sessions where you ask people what would have caused them to answer the way they did, what changes could we make. A automobile dealership called Jerry Seiner, the technicians in the shop. These are people who have tactile skills and are very proud of what they do, but are generally regarded as, oh, what could they know? We'll tell them what to do in other dealerships. Instead, Jerry Seiner management asked, what could we do better? And they said, oil changes. They said, what about oil changes? When we get a request for an oil change, we have to go to the parts department and get in line and request an oil filter and oil and all the things that we need, which costs us a lot of time. And we're paid based on what we get done. And so that doesn't seem like a good use of our time. Why don't we put those supplies out on the floor in the center where we can all access them and save an hour a day? Or the Delta Airlines gate agent who observed that because at Hartsfield International, Delta was parking their jets at 90 degrees to the gate, it required 2 moves of the tug to get the plane out of there. The gate agent, who has absolutely nothing to do with the ramp, said, what if we parked those jets at 45 degrees and we didn't have 2 moves of the tug, we had 1, and saves millions of dollars. So it's not always obvious who will have the answers and what kind of answers. But what is true is if we don't create a safe space, like you said, and if we don't ask the question, we will never hear the answer. We'll just do it like we're doing it. And then we'll say, how do we increase 5%? Do you really want 5%? Or as a leader, do you want game-changing results? That's the buy-in advantage.
What powerful examples. I love them for so many different reasons. First of all, as you mentioned, Dave, they don't necessarily come from the people you expect to have those answers. Second
Right.
of all, when people in the organization see that their contribution can have such a significant impact, their buy-in goes up and they start being more aware of those opportunities. It's win-win in all respects. However, what I find, it requires taking the time, pausing, and asking those questions rather than a sense of overwhelm that a lot of leaders have, where they're just trying to run with the normal workflow rather than taking the time to ask the kind of questions you're talking about.
Yeah. And so 2 things we observed. One, in the book, we talked about a principle of slow down to speed up, slow down to speed up. And one of the characteristics we see among successful executives is let's go. And so they'll hear an idea and say, let's execute. And they will take it on themselves to execute or figure out how to execute, which is undercutting the buy-in advantage. What highly effective leaders do is use their sense of urgency to think about first, slow down and think about how can I get people to volunteer to take on how we're going to do this? Who has energy about it? And asking for volunteers and then supporting them through the process by checking in, where checking in doesn't look like, have you done it yet? Have you done it yet?
Dave, one of the things that you also mentioned that I find to be extremely relevant today is that a lot of the executives that I interact with, more so in Washington, quite a bit in the States, but I think globally, are feeling that there is a sense of crisis, whether it is with cuts, tariffs, things changing from day to day. Now, you say that crisis often throw teams off course, but crisis as an opportunity. How can crisis be viewed as an opportunity in this moment in time?
It's generally true that whenever there are times of change, when things get unfrozen, when people are looking for different solutions, different ways to do things, when people are forced to react in different ways, it's a new opportunity for new solutions to show up. And so one of the things that we recommend to our clients is to call up each of your, say, top 10 or top 15 customers and ask them, how is your business pivoting in this time? And learn from your customers firsthand. That's a different call than, hey, how much of our stuff do you expect to buy? That's different than, do you know how amazing our stuff is? It's instead putting yourself in their shoes and asking, how do you see the world? And use that information to build patterns and identify new opportunities that you could address. The other thing about this, and it's coming out in a recent newsletter on leadership that you'll appreciate, is one of our jobs is being Chief Reassurance Officer. Chief Reassurance Officer. What we know is we don't know what the future holds. What we do know is all this change is going to continue at a pretty fast and furious pace, whether you're in Pakistan or whether you're in the US or whether you're in Australia. It doesn't matter. The change is here. As Chief Reassurance Officer, what you have the opportunity to do is to talk to your team, talk to your employees, whether it's a small team or thousands, and say, I don't know what the future holds. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change. However, what I do know is our compelling purpose, the reason we exist, why it's worth doing hasn't changed. Here's what it is. Just as a reminder, here are the values by which we'll do that. And then here are the top 3 things that we're doing as an organization to take advantage of or address this time of change, to give people reassurance that we recognize we don't know and we're aware that stuff is changing and we have a plan. And that's really important communications. And if you're doing it once in an email or once in a town hall, you're missing the opportunity, because people show up with new uncertainty every day as they're bombarded by Sky News, or they're bombarded by what's in the newspaper or USA Today or TikTok or however they get their news. Chief Reassurance Officer.
I love that point, Dave. That chief reassurance officer is an essential role in that in many instances, the CEOs and executives that I see assume that once they have shared their thoughts, that is enough. Not recognizing, as you mentioned, we're bombarded on a daily basis. We turn on TV, radio, whatever it is, with news that makes us more anxious and question maybe our roles, our organization's survival. And I love the authenticity and the vulnerability with which you approached it. None of us can guarantee the future and have certainty about that future, but there are certain things with respect to the values, the value proposition of the organization, certain things that could be reinforced and repeated. And that's an essential role. And if I've learned one lesson, and I would encourage listeners to think about, is it's okay to repeat. So be the chief reinforcement officer, be chief repeating officer. Repeat, repeat. Don't assume that once you've communicated it, it's enough.
And we would say, keep repeating until people can repeat it back to you and they say enough and stop. And what is it, the data, whether, I don't know if it's accurate, but it says, unless you've heard something 7 times, it's not in your bones. So if we have 3 priorities for this quarter or this year, if we have our 4 values, have we truly repeated it 7 times? And what stories do we tell to help people remember what it is we're trying to do? Because stories will anchor a lot better than a 14 sentence. Our objective to increase share of market is to do the following 7 things. Nobody will remember any of that stuff. Tell a story. Have simple ideas. Repeat it often, 7 times. And you can do it through text. You can do it through social media. You can do it through emails. You can do it through video calls. You can do it through town hall calls. You can do it through handwritten notes. Any way that works for you, the more ways, the better.
It is a powerful tool. It's a powerful process, powerful approach for leaders, and something that I think a lot of us underestimate. Dave, as the audience is listening to this, what are 1 or 2 things you would tell them to do today or this week that will help move that needle of buy-in of their employees?
One of the things we have in the book is we have a self-assessment that basically asks how your leaders are showing up and what the experience of running the organization is. We would suggest first thing you do is share that assessment with your leadership team, whether you are running a department, a division, or an entire company, and ask them to complete it independently and then compare answers. What you're looking for is, are we aligned on how we see the world? And what are the areas, where can we start? We've probably got, 100 ideas in the book, and we don't expect anybody to implement 100 ideas. Which are the 2 or 3 ideas that would have the most impact on our organization? And decide that with your team. One of the things that scares me is when a leader says, here's the situation in our organization, here's what we want you to do, Mr. Consultant. And what we do is say, appreciate that. And that's your experience. What I want to do is I want to talk to 6 leaders on your team and find out what their experience is. So we also suggest leaders go around, and it used to be called management by walking around, ask people about their experience. Hey, I'm really curious. What do you think is working well and not working well around here? And sometimes if you get the reaction, just tell me what you wanted me to do, then you have a buy-in problem. If you get some honest dialogue, then you've got something to work with. So ask people.
Those are outstanding action items. And as you mentioned, there are hundreds of things that you can do at any point in time in any organization. It's what is the 1 or 2 things that impact the organization most?
I'm a pretty avid golfer, and I am overwhelmed by the number of tips in Golf Digest and all these online sites. The challenge is I don't know which tips apply to me. And so again, back to our collective genius, when I have the opportunity for you and I to look at the same question or same data and then have the discussion about why we think this is the first thing to do, that's where the genius really occurs. And you can tell people this is a great idea and this is what we ought to do. And you've just cut them out of the equation. Instead of asking, what did you make of that question? What meaning did you apply? Because your experience is what filters your meaning. And what I want to know is, what's the meaning you make of this question, this problem, this whatever? Because there I tap into your genius and I'll see, oh, I had a blind spot. And that's where the magic occurs. It's collective genius.
Collective genius, love it, and love your experience filters your meaning. What powerful words, Dave. Now, for the audience to follow your work, find out more about your book, where would you send them to, Dave?
Buyinbook.com, buyinbook.com, really simple site. We'll give you information on the book. We have a website, Garrison Growth, Growth, garrisongrowth.com, where you can sign up for a free weekly leadership newsletter, and we share specific ideas on what to do about challenges we learn every single week from our leaders. And then we have workshops throughout the year, and we have a retreat for senior leaders where they can get together and learn how to truly lead to generate the buy-in advantage. We love the opportunity to share And we love the opportunity to learn.
I really appreciate your insights, Dave, as well as great examples and practical steps that leaders can take. Thank you so much, Dave Garrison.
Thank you so much.